Hi everyone, and thank you for joining this lecture. I'm Kati, and this project is joint work with Ehud Lamm. Today I'd like to talk to you about how insights from social identity theory, combined with insights from norm psychology, can provide us a more comprehensive account of group behavior. People's attitude towards social norms play a crucial role in understanding group behavior. But what makes people follow certain norms in certain social situations and in other social circumstances follow entirely different, perhaps even contradicting, social norms? Why some people smoke when socializing with friends, while the same people would never light up a cigarette in family gatherings or in their workplaces? In this lecture, we want to evaluate the possibility that to adequately understand the psychological underpinnings of people's adherence to social norms, we must simultaneously take into account theories about norm psychology alongside theories about social categorization and social identification. Social identity theory was developed in the early 70s, primarily by the social psychologist Henry Tajfel and his colleagues. They found out that people tend to immediately identify and establish in-group and out-group behaviors, even in random, meaningless, and temporary group assignments. According to Tajfel, social identity is that part of an individual's self-concept which derives from his knowledge of his membership of a social group or groups, together with the value and emotional significance attached to that membership. Tajfel and his doctoral student, John Turner, distinguished between three mental processes that occur when people classify themselves and others as belonging to their in-group or to their out-group. The first is social categorization. We assign people to social categories that tells us something about them. The second is social identification, when people adopt the identity of the group they categorize themselves as belonging to and conform to the norms of the group. The third is social comparison, when people compare their own group with other groups in order to maintain a feeling of superiority over an outgroup. Social norms are part of the second mental process, social identification, when people adopt their group identity. However, while social norms play a significant role in social identity theory, they are often described solely as attributes of the group or as signal of social identification. Individuals conform to social norms to validate their social identity and group membership, but they do not do so because they have a deep sense of commitment or obligation to the norm itself. People change their norms when their social identity changes, and since people change groups very often, perhaps on a daily or even hourly basis, they also change their norms very quickly. So norms are not necessarily internalized. However, a different picture emerges when we consider social norms in light of norm psychology accounts. So norm psychology refers to the psychological underpinnings of norm-governed behavior. It is a suite of psychological adaptations that is related to people's ability to follow norms and behave according to the social norms of their society. This figure, taken from Chudik's and Henrik paper from 2011, suggests that there are several mechanisms for sustained cooperation in social norms that operate within group and affect intergroup competition. This selects for psychological adaptations for norms. In turn, these psychological adaptations facilitate cooperation within the group and competition between groups. So one of the components of norm psychology is the ability to acquire norms. But how norms are acquired? So according to norm psychology accounts, it is through processes of norm internalization in which norms become goals in themselves, and as such, they become a significant part of a person's identity. Processes of norm internalization begin in early childhood, which makes it extremely difficult to change an individual's internalized norms. The internalization of norms, on the one hand, helps people navigate the social landscape in the sense that they do not need to evaluate and think about every action they choose to make each and every time. However, on the other hand, it implies a less flexible behavior, since once you internalize a norm, it becomes a part of your identity and part of your personality, which is much less subject to change. So according to neuropsychology accounts, people's attitude towards social norms is determined by norm internalization, and it is through norm internalization that an individual acquires her status as an in-group member. Social identity theory, however, proposes an opposite picture. According to social identity theory, an individual's attitude towards social norms is determined by her level of identification with the group. It is only when she categorizes herself as a group member that she follows the group norms. Processes of norm internalization do occur in social identity theory, but only after people define themselves as member of a distinct social or category and learn and develop the category or group's appropriate and expected behaviors. So from putting side by side these two pictures of social identity theory and norm psychology accounts arises the question of what exactly is being internalized. So norm psychology accounts suggest that it is social norms that are being internalized, while social identity theory suggests that it is a social identity or group identity that is being internalized. Norm psychology accounts focus on social norms and processes of norm internalization, but they give much less attention to individual social identity and group identity. Social identity theory, on the other hand, while concentrating on social identification processes, seem to marginalize the role social norms and norm internalization processes play in people's group behavior, and ignore the evolutionary perspective on how people's attitude towards norms originated and evolved. We suggest that human behavior is shaped by both approaches. The ability to recognize norms and punish norm violators, for example, is affected by the internalization of social norms, but it is also affected by the internalization of social identity, which favors group identity and makes us extra suspicious towards people who do not obey the norm. Internalization of social identity affects internalization of social norms and vice versa, and all of them are affected by cultural evolution, natural selection, personal identity, and group identification. Internalization of social norms implies less flexible behavior towards norms, while internalization of social identity implies more flexible attitude towards norms, which might explain this continuum of a behavior in which people's behaviors reside. So to go back to the figure we've seen before from Chudik's and Henrik's paper, what we want to suggest is an enhancement to this perspective by pointing out that social identity affects and is being affected by at least some of these components, such as group competition, cooperation, pro-sociality, and of course, norm psychology. So one research area that can benefit from such an integrated approach is the study of complex societies. Complex societies comprise of many different groups with many different norms, and its members interact daily with people from their outgroups, especially in public places. So consider this individual, who is deeply committed to a norm of not shoving, stands politely in line at his neighborhood grocery store. He does so because he expects most people in the store to follow the same norm. However, upon arriving to a busy train station, where he expects to encounter different people with different attitudes towards norm following, he adapts to the new environment and starts to push and shove when necessary. So what can explain this rapid change of behavior? Norm psychology account would probably suggest that he might have low sensitivity to the norm, or that he comes from a loose culture where rapid change of behaviors are more acceptable and welcomed. While this explanation might as well be true, we want to highlight that in complex societies, in multicultural societies, we must also take into account explanation that has to do with social identification processes. So in social identity theory, people change their norms or norm-following attitudes to protect their social status. In the neighborhood grocery store, our individual identified most people as belonging to his in-group. Hence, he felt that his social status is rather secure. However, upon arriving to the busy train station, where he identified most people as belonging to his out-group, he felt that his social status is at stake, and he needed to adapt to these new social circumstances. He did not internalize the new norm, nor is he less committed to the old norm. He can be highly sensitive to the norm, and he can come from a tight culture. His flexible behavior can derive from his effort to preserve his social status while being wholeheartedly committed to the norm of not shoving. Social identification processes determine our group belonging, and group belonging and group identification determines which norms became salient. So in this example, in the grocery store, it were the in-group norms that became salient. But in the train station, when the social circumstances have changed, it were the out-group norms that become salient and affected this individual's behavior. So to conclude, people internalize both social identity and social norms, and they feel committed to both. Processes of internalization of social identity and processes of internalization of social norms affect each other, and both affect group behavior. A key factor for understanding normative behavior in complex societies with multiple roles and subgroups, which shift and change over time, is the negotiation of social identity. Social identity theory and norm psychology accounts each explain a different part of the picture, but when they put together, they combine to create a more comprehensive account of human behavior. Thank you.